I've played a bunch of the Far Cry games, like Far Cry 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're a really fun series about surviving in the wilderness and stealing people's trucks and killing them, which is all sorts of fun. But I'll tell you what isn't fun, Far Cry the movie. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire fucking life. So, let's find the positives. Now, usually when I go to watch films on positives, I do it alone. But lately, I've been inviting my two friends over to talk about video game films as well because they know a lot about movies. So, without further ado, here's Mike and Terrence.
So I guess I have to talk about the plot from Far Cry. The plot. There is no plot.
I actually don't really remember, and isn't that silly? It's an action movie that's forgettable. That shouldn't be. Even the craziest generic 80s action film has things you remember and you get excited about. This one is very forgettable. Even after watching the movie, we all had to sit around and kind of go, what was it about again? Who is this? And that's just the way it is.
Far Cry the movie is a terrible film made by cinematic auteur Uwe Boll, who's notorious for being one of the worst filmmakers in the history of the medium. And not only is he one of the worst filmmakers, he happens to have all of his films based off of really good video games that get transferred into really bad movies. Now, one thing I really hate about Uwe Boll is that he never really is able to take the concept of the video game and transfer it all that well over to film.
So, in Far Cry the game, you're Jack Carver, your boat explodes, you go to the island, you're after a journalist, crazy army. Okay, so they got certain things like that right in the movie. There are a few things here and there that they have borrowed from the game.
It's this very simple concept for a game, just having this sort of open world-ish kind of attitude about it.
Basically, it's a drunkard lying on his boat, sleeping. He gets commissioned by a reporter to take him to some island that he won't get to. It's like, I'll get you close, but we're not going there. And then it's, I'll get you there, but this is a one-way trip. And then his boat blows up, and then other shit happens, but I couldn't care less.
And the other thing I really hate is that they took the nice tropical location of Far Cry in the original game and turned it into northern Canada.
Okay, so Uwe Boll as a director, we can all admit, is way more missed than he is hit. And unfortunately, for some of the interviews I've read while this movie was shooting from some of the actors, yes, he was more interested in playing on a cell phone than actually directing the film.
It took 3 people to write the script for Far Cry, and it's still unintelligible. Like, to be able to even tell you a brief synopsis other than what I said is near impossible.
Which unfortunately adds weight to the theory that this was more just a way to get money from the German government and for all of him and his friends to get paychecks.
The funny thing about Far Cry is it was a movie that the rights to it were purchased before it was a game. So I'm not sure exactly at what point Uwe Boll decided to pursue this. Did he see like a sizzle reel, a demo, concept art, some kind of pitch? I don't know, but it seems that the only things that he got were certain bullet points.
There's a lot of problems with the movie, but not so many problems that we couldn't find a lot of okay things about it. For one, I was okay with the fact that they actually did use a couple of references to the video game.
The one that sticks out in my head the most actually is one of the simplest, throwing rocks to distract enemy soldiers, used in the game, used in the movie.
The stupid red shirt that the main character Jack wears at the beginning. The fact that his boat blows up.
And the one thing that actually stands out even more than that is the vehicular combat. See, Far Cry wasn't the first game to use that, but it used it as a viable action method now, and most first-person shooters now use that. The movie actually did copy that. In particular, the boat chase sequence down the river, pretty much right out of the game, and I do appreciate that.
Other than that, that's it. I don't know how much of the game was even done when he saw it. And it shows. The movie really shows it.
So at least those 3 things are in the film. Rocks, a shirt, and Jeeps. So positive number 1, there's some actual references to the video game.
So it's been reported that Far Cry had a budget of $30 million. While it's safe to assume that it was some kind of Germanic Canadian movie swindle, where they spent about maybe $4 million on the production, and then everybody just kind of like had nice checks after.
When you go to watch this movie for the first time, you would be impressed by how cheap the movie looks. Pretty much every scene looks really poorly written, really poorly constructed, really poorly directed, but whenever you get to an action sequence, they seem to be kind of okay.
So even though earlier I said the movie is boring and forgettable, which it is, one thing I'll give him credit for is the ending action sequence, and that has a lot to do with the parkour. Not that I'm like a giant fan of parkour, but I really liked it in this movie. It was very well coordinated and choreographed, and it actually looked like the actors were going to be in serious danger if they missed a particular jump or flip.
The parkour is legit, and when I'm talking legit, it's kind of like almost feeling like I'm watching a Jackie Chan stunt, but kind of not having the joy of it being Jackie Chan.
So those are fun. Those elements. So that's okay. The second positive is that this movie has some pretty decent action sequences. I mean, there's so few things in this movie that are good that it was so difficult to find the next two positives. And I tell you, Mike Terrence and I sat down watching this movie, religiously trying to find good aspects. And when I say this next one, I want you to understand that we're not making a joke here, we're being serious. For whatever reason, they used the Far Cry font. And I know, a lot of you are like, that's not a positive. Well, I like the Far Cry font.
If there's one thing I love about video games, it's the freaking font. Street Fighter, Resident Evil, Mega Man, all have great fonts. You know what else has great fonts? Far Cry. Far Cry has an awesome font. In fact, I wish I could type in that font on my computer.
But the one thing that they got dead on was that font, and it was straight to hell from there.
The fact that they used the Far Cry font means that they quite literally had to have played the game at some point. So that's proof that by using the Far Cry font, they knew the game existed. So that's the third positive. Positive number 3 is that the movie uses the Far Cry font. When I watched this entire film, I really didn't feel like there was any threat happening. The evil scientist, Udo Kier, is not really scary. The soldiers in the movie don't really feel scary as well. In fact, a couple of times, Jack Carver just kinda took care of them easily, which was boring. But one thing that did work in the movie were the super soldiers.
They were nigh impenetrable. They looked very unnatural, scary even.
And one thing they did to them, which might be a makeup job, but I think it looks a little too good, is they color corrected their skin so they're this gray undead. And their only way to kill them was like a single shot in the eye or the mouth, so unless you're a sure shot military guy, you're never going to be able to do.
They had no moral compass, so they just killed everything that was in sight, and they seemed authentically threatening.
Usually people would be able to sit through a movie and assume a macho facade. If I was in the movie, I would be able to do this. I challenge anyone that is sane and doesn't want to die to picture themselves in that situation where there's a hulking mass of what used to be a human charging towards you.
In fact, everyone, including the enemies in the movie, were scared of these things, and I think that made for a really good monster in the movie. A villain that had nothing going for it except for the urge to kill, which works. Everybody was scared of them, even me. The final positive is authentically scary villains. If you're a big fan of the Far Cry video games, you gotta stay away from this film. I know, you may be curious, you may think, hey, I should watch this. But here's the problem. When you've watched this movie, that's about 2 hours you're never gonna get back. 2 hours of your life that get burnt away because you spent them watching Til Schwinger act as an American in a movie. Even though he's German. Even though he's treated to be German in the film. He's not supposed to be. He's supposed to be Jack Carver, and they just do everything in their power to get this wrong. Uwe Boll has a bunch of terrible films, but this one has to be the worst. And not because it's cheesy, but because it's one of the most boring films you'll ever see in his entire career.
And now it's time for a moment with Terrence as he reads you a quote from some idiot.
I'd like to share with you a quote from Dr. Uwe Boll on Hollywood. This is something I feel you need to hear. That is the most bullshit business with bullshit idiots, one after the other lined up behind each other. You know, they're all f***ing each other in the asses and nobody makes any decisions. All the actors I have ever worked with, Ben Kingsley, whatever, are f***ing pussies. Nothing else. They're all assholes of the managers, agents, and publicists, and attorneys. That's from June 2015. And the last thing I want to share with you, Dr. Uwe Boll has confirmed that even though he makes countless video game movies, he does not play video games at all.